A raven circles overhead, its wings slicing the grey sky above snow-laced thatch. Below, silence hangs heavy over a forgotten village. Hearths are cold. Doors hang open. Wind hisses through shuttered windows, like breath from something unseen. Searching, the bellows creak, a wheelbarrow groans under frozen soil. A lone figure drags it toward a sunless patch of earth face pale, wrapped in linen, shoulders hunched in cold defiance. The plague did not knock. It seeped, silent, sure, and famine followed, hollowing the land with hands colder than the grave. In a dark cottage, trembling hands grind garlic and yarrow on stone bitter, ancient. The mix is tossed onto embers. Smoke writhes up, stinging and sacred. The room flares orange, then falls into shadow. Crackling stems, wind through broken beams. Somewhere distant, a bell tolls once, twice, in the snow-choked field. A woman kneels, pressing onion bulbs into dirt where wheat once stood. Inside, a girl lifts a ladle, steam rising as she feeds a coughing elder from a single battered bowl. When the Black Death gripped their lungs, and famine turned flour to dust, survival came not from wealth but from memory, myth, and method. Tonight, we unearth the forgotten rituals that turned plague pits into places of hope, and famine fields into desperate feasts. Dawn breaks, not with light but with silence. Fog coils over the village moat, where makeshift crosses jut from the earth-splintered fence posts, now standing as grey markers. A cart groans over frozen mud, coffins clattering softly inside, stuffed with straw and linen, not names. Edith the healer kneels in a dim cottage, the fire low, the air heavy with smoke and scorched herbs. A child burns with fever beside her, breath thin and rattling. She dips a cloth into a bowl vinegar rosewater, and quiet prayer and presses it to the girl's brow. Her hand trembles once, then stills. When scripture failed and doctors fled, the midwife and the miller remained. Their tools were prayer, vinegar, and impossible calm. Outside, Thomas the miller listens at a doria pressed close. Inside, a cough, dry and distant. No voice answers, just breath. He steps back, marks the door in chalk. Later, by candlelight, he lifts a sack of barley into a hidden root cellar beneath the floorboards. Beneath the hunger, dirt clings to his sleeves. A crucifix swings from his neck as he packs it tight and seals the hatch. Not all survival was saintly. Food vanished fast and the line between help and horde blurred with every sunset. Beyond the village, men dig. The sound of shovels cuts through the still air, rhythmic, brutal. A woman weeps, pressing a child's woolen cap to her chest. Back inside, Edith tucks sprigs of tansy and rue beneath the child's pillow. She murmurs the old words, half prayer, half spell. Her voice is cracked, but steady. Against an invisible terror, they made armor from flowers and words. Superstition became strategy. Edith stands. Dirt on her palms, resolve in her eyes. We will endure, she whispers. The wind carries it, just as Thomas's footstep fades into silence. Then darkness. In our world, vaccines and grocery aisles shield us. We check expiration dates, tap tracking apps, scroll news alerts. We trust sterile spaces and data dashboards. But medieval villagers, they faced death with no pharmacy, no supermarket. Only what they could grow, gather, or barter. A gloved hand lifts a vial from a cryo-freezer, bits barcode blinking softly. In a lab flooded with glass and light, a pipette draws a clear dose. Behind it, a line of vials waits. The war on disease, measured in micrograms, cut to a grocery store. Aisles stretch on like lifeline-stacked cans, glowing self-checkouts, soft pop music humming through the air. A mother scans, a child laughs, a freezer hums. Our shield is science, alerts, airlifted goods, but not long ago there were no trucks, no charts, no shelves, only what the earth gave, or didn't. A root cellar, cold and peat, jars of nettle tonic, 2 shriveled onions, a clay dish of sour cabbage, its rim chipped and mossed. A peasant sits cross-legged, counting dried peas 1, 2, 3 on a wooden plate. They didn't fear outages or inflation. They feared frost in May, locusts in July. A single worm, a single rot, could undo a season. In today's world, a woman scrolls a TikTok tutorial, how to preserve peaches without sugar. Centuries earlier, another woman stands by a peat fire, threading fish on twine, rubbing them with salt scraped from coastal stone. A child in clean clothes sips boxed juice through a straw. Another, long ago, cups both hands round mossroot tibita. Thin, warm, we scroll for solutions. They scraped them from bark. What we refrigerate, they buried in frost. What we Google, they guessed often by candlelight. A grandmother twists open a mason jar of pickled dandelion greens, and beside a smoky hearth, Edith ladles broth, thick with thyme and tansy, into a rough clay bowl. The fear today is abstract. Then, it was close. It breathed in every child's cough. It watched from every frost-bitten field. Still they endured, not with plenty, but with practice. By mixing hope with herb, sacrifice with strategy, and hunger with wisdom, a pantry fades, a hearth glows. To women, centuries apart, preparing for the same hunger, in the hellscape of medieval plague and famine, survival wasn't luck. It was labor, memory, ritual. They didn't wait for salvation, they forged it. With no hospitals, no aid convoys, no forecasts, villagers outmaneuvered death with what they had. Smoke, herb, faith, and astonishing resilience. These were not desperate gambles. They were survival systems crafted by centuries of crisis. And in many ways, they rival our modern responses. They crafted a botanical armory. Bundles of rue, garlic, and juniper hung in doorways like shields. They burned herbs in hearths, plumes of aromatic smoke, cleansing the air, masking the stench of sickness, and perhaps slowing its spread. These weren't just folk rituals. They were chemical defenses in disguise. In the soil, they adapted again. Frost-resistant barley, turnips buried deep, beets fermented in peat. Every root, every leaf, counted, rationed, preserved. They didn't just survive the harvest. They preserved the hunger. And when contagion came close, they drew invisible lines, marked plague winds on crude maps, hung cloth strips on infected homes, held moots not for debate but for survival. Quarantine was sacred. Ritual and hygiene walked hand in hand. Fear became order. Even their meals were strategy. Lichen broth, fish head soup, beer not for joy, but for nourishment, fortified with herbs like mugwort, yarrow, and wormwood. Simple meals, improvised, bitter, strange yet potent. Food as fuel, as medicine, as memory. And though modern science now dissects these techniques, the truth remains. They worked. Join us from charnel pits to hidden barns, as we uncover the survival recipes forged not in comfort, but in catastrophe. The wisdom they left behind still speaks through root cellars, smoke rituals, and the quiet resilience of the forgotten. Beneath the moors and forests, time writes its own record. A peat core is sliced open, dark layers flecked with pollen, charcoal, and spores. The technician slides one layer beneath a scope. Rye grains, lichen, and traces of smoke shimmer into view. Peat acts like nature's archive. Each stratum preserves a season's memory. Flood, drought, fire, Charcoal spikes hint at fields raised perhaps in cleansing or chaos. Fungal blooms betray years of decay, rot traveling house to house on damp air. Even pollen tells a story, years where rye thrived, others when lichen overtook crops. These shifts aren't just agricultural, they're emotional barometers of fear and adaptation. From these compressed centuries, we uncover a living pulse, one not found in books, but in bogs. It's here the silence breaks. Famine was not failure, but fight. What we read in peat isn't just past, it's proof that each disaster left behind not only ruin but resilience. In a sealed lab, under sterile light, a tooth is cracked open, its pulp harvested, the machine hums. Within hours, strands of DNA unfurl, Yersinia pestis identified, the culprit confirmed. This was no divine punishment, it was bacterial warfare. But medieval villagers had no germ theory. They believed in miasma, bad air, grave stench, corpse rot, and yet they acted. Burned herbs, fumigated homes, masked their faces with cloths steeped in vinegar. The idea was flawed, but the instinct was sound. Even now, we recognize the echoes: quarantine zones, ventilation, scent masks. Their rituals, born of fear, mirrored science yet to come. The dual belief for physical corruption and spiritual contagion shaped a world where medicine, myth, and method mingled. Faith kept courage. Smoke warded panic. In that fragile mix of belief and behavior, we see the earliest blueprint of epidemic response. They didn't know the name of their killer, but they fought it anyway. She weaves the garland, slowly, rue, garlic, mugwort. Her fingers work with purpose, not panic. The bundle is hung above the bed, beside the door, in the window frame. Now, we know why. Modern tests reveal these herbs emit antimicrobial compounds. Garlic alone releases allicin, a potent volatile that disrupts bacterial membranes. Rue gives off furanocomarins. Mugwort delivers when bundled together and burned or steeped in vinegar and distilled into steam. These herbs transformed homes into botanical wards. A folk fumigation system, masking the stench and maybe even suppressing the spread. The science is nascent but promising. Herbal volatiles may have reduced airborne bacterial load. Vinegar, vaporacetic acid, dampened contagion hotspots. For villagers, it was prayer and plant. For us, it's chemistry and culture. But the line is thin. Their garlands weren't decorative, they were defensive. The scent of garlic wasn't dinner, it was defiance. They filled their lungs with bitterness and hope, and they called it protection. Barley failed. Again and again, blackened with rot or crushed by early frost. So they changed. Rye and oats, less noble, but more reliable, took root. We see it in the layers of ash and seed, in the crop records scratched onto monk's vellum, in the bones of survivors. Isotope analysis of medieval skeletons reveals dietary shifts, more varied cereal intake, with markers consistent with oat and rye digestion. These grains flourished in wet soil, resisted mildew, and ripened faster. This wasn't innovation for innovation's sake, was necessity in motion. Farming became flexible, tactical, crop rotation intensified. Monoculture gave way to diversification. What we see is not collapse but recalibration. Villagers knew that food wasn't guaranteed. Soil had moods. Rain had temperament. So they planted wide and deep, stored more roots, took fewer chances. Every grain told a story of adaptation. In hunger, they learned to pivot, and in planting, they survived. When bread grew scarce, they turned to water. Bone collagen doesn't lie. Scientists analyzing human remains from the 14th century found a marked uptick in marine-based proteins. Carbon and nitrogen ratios tell the tale. Cod, herring, shellfish all surged in diets. Archaeological sites reveal fishbone pits, smoke racks, and brining barrels in villages once thought too far inland for fish dependency, but trade routes stretched further than we assumed. Salted fish traveled by cart and pack animal. The poor consumed what was close. Rivers yielded pike, eels, carp. Coastal dwellers fermented herring in barrels for winter use. Fish heads boiled for broth fed, more mouths than loaves ever could. Omega fats, vitamin D, and iron entered the bloodstream, not through bread, but through gills and scale. This wasn't a fallback, it was a pivot. A protein surge when the fields grew silent. And when the harvest failed, the rivers spoke. Before fridges, there was peat. Dug into hillsides or beneath longhouses, these cellars held steady at 2–4 degrees Celsius all year. Just cold enough to keep roots alive. Just warm enough to avoid freeze damage. Inside, clay casks of beets, carrots, onions, and turnips sat nestled in straw or wrapped in cloths soaked with ash water. Moisture was regulated with sand. Rats kept out with smoke. What they created was passive refrigeration, a preservation system tuned by climate, not current. Peat insulation blocked out temperature swings. Clay breathed enough to prevent mold. Some sites even show small channels cut to drain condensation and keep air moving. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were food banks. Villagers didn't rely on harvest alone, they relied on storage. Root cellars became insurance against frost, against time. And in that darkness, nutrition endured. When famine knocked, these quiet chambers held fast. A barrel bubbles. Inside, shredded cabbage, turnips, and nettles, immersed in brine. Days pass, lactic acid forms, the vegetables soften, the flavor sharpens. This wasn't pickling for pleasure. It was survival. Fermentation didn't just preserve, it nourished. Vitamins multiplied. Pathogens died. The acid environment warded off mold, and the tang signaled safety. Anthropologists studying grave sites confirm that vitamin deficiencies were rare in villages with consistent fermentation. Nettle brine, cabbage, mash, and beet kvass gave access to vitamin C long into winter. This was their health food. Alive, probiotic, preventative. Fermentation was communal, two families sharing crocks, passing recipes by hand, keeping starter cultures alive across generations. Where refrigeration failed, bacteria thrived for good. They built microbial pantries, layering taste with trust. Fermented food wasn't a luxury, it was security. Even in hunger, they ate with care. And the sour taste of survival lingered sweetly. The plague returned in waves, and each time villages adapted. Chalk X's marked homes with sickness. Rope cordons surrounded infected huts. Travelers were halted at way stations and made to wait out the watch, a period of imposed stillness. Though germ theory was unknown, contagion was observed. Families isolated themselves. Food was passed with tongs. Water was left at thresholds. Some villagers mapped plague winds, directions from which illness seemed to blow. They built shrines to shield borders. They lit herbs along paths and posted signs in Latin and local script warning outsiders away. Dr. Henrik Scheisberg explains. Their cordons were both literal and symbolic. They mimicked what we now call containment zones, and they often worked. The rules weren't always consistent, but they were obeyed. Ritual met practicality. Fear met system. In maps of medieval towns, we now trace herb gardens, plague huts, quarantine lines, all carefully marked, Together, they formed a survival network. Invisible borders, drawn by hands that refused to let death pass quietly. Dawn light reveals frost-cracked fields. Villagers stand at the edge of a plague, cordon-scarred wool cloaks swaying. Thomas secures the barn door. Edith hangs garlands of rue and juniper across thresholds. Town criers shout notices. No one in, no one out. Penalty is death. Fear and discipline hang heavy. Rope barriers sag between pounded posts. Dew glistening along the coarse twine. The air smells of iron and old peat. A child clutches her mother's skirts, eyes fixed on the ward sign. Thomas hammers shut the grain hatch with measured, mournful rhythm. Edith moves down the row of homes, her fingers brushing every lintel. She mutters the old rhyme rue for breath, juniper for bonaz, if it might anchor hope. The crier's bell tolls again, more ragged this time. Crows burst from the trees at its echo. On day one, the village drew its line cordon, and ritual became twin shields at dawn. Edith and her assistants crouch by peat pits, stuffing bundles of rosemary, sage, and rue into the smoulder. Smoke rolls in grey curls along cobbled alleys, under doors, and through rafters. Villagers gather, holding cups filled with vinegar, laced with honey and horseradish root. Brother Anselm passes through the crowd, pressing prayer tokens into calloused hands. His voice, gravelled and low, echoes with ancient liturgy and simple comfort. Inside homes, herbs are dropped on heated stones, releasing thick vapors. Windows stay latched tight. Curtains twitch with cautious eyes. Children whisper the smoke rhyme, clean the air. Keep out the claw, as Edith presses her palms to the hearthstones and nods. A young man lights a new fire near his threshold, smoke chasing the edge of the cordon line. Behind him, the wind changes, curling the scent of rosemary back toward the village center. Narration, combining fire and faith, they stoked hearths and hope, believing clean air saved lungs and souls. Marta's boots crunch over half-frozen reeds as she wades into the creek, her breath catching in bursts. She slides a wicker scoop under the water's skin, lifting smelt that shimmer like coins. Her hands shake, but her grip stays sure. On the bank, children help gather river mussels, fingers red from the chill. A gull cries overhead, circling once, twice, then vanishing behind a tree line. Edith tends a cauldron back at the longhouse. Fish heads boil slowly, their eyes clouding in the broth. Scales shimmer on the surface as slick beads of oil bloom and swirl. Marta returns, her basket clinking with shells. The racks beside the house fill with fish strung on twine, smoke from green alder logs curling around their silver skins. Villagers breathe deeply near the racks. Steam curls from mugs and nostrils alike. Protein came from rivers, smoked fish became literal lifelines, rich in oils that fired weary hearts. Thomas moves through the barn's back slope, ducking into the root cellar. The air is thick and cool, lined with peat bricks and earthen shelves. He taps each turnip and beats some soft, but still viable. On one shelf, jars of nettle soup glisten with lactic brine. He opens one, the scent sour but alive. Carefully, he rotates each jar. Outside, Marta kneels beside a trickling creek, guiding children as they pluck watercress and sorrel from between the thawing stones. A boy bites a leaf and grimaces. She laughs and points out a better patch. Inside again, Edith ladles soup into bowls, sprinkling dried thyme. The broth simmers, green and pungent. Children return, handing Marta bunches of bright leaves, their fingers pricked red from the cold. Shelf-stable greens extended nutrition. Even frozen fields offered hidden bounty forged through earth and water. The longhouse smells of smoke, broth, and barley. A single pot bubbles over a low flame, its contents rich with smoked fish, nettles, dried berries, and the last handful of barley. Brother Anselm circles the hearth, dipping bundles of herb in water and flicking droplets into the stew. He chants under his breath, cross-drawing in the air above each bowl handed out. Villagers gather on benches. Some weep quietly, others close their eyes, savoring the scent before spooning the hot broth to their lips. Children pass oyster shells filled with dried mint and thyme. These are tokens, blessings against weakness. Martha and Thomas exchange a glance across the firelit room. A nod, a soft breath, a small smile. A girl clutches her bowl with both hands, steam curling around her cheeks. In darkest times, the feast meant more than food, told a story. We survive together. The longhouse glows with quiet fire. Outside, frost bites the air. Inside, the hearth beats steady as a drum. Edith stokes the flame with careful hands. A young man replaces her, draping another log, his shadow dancing along soot-dark walls. On mats and benches, villagers sleep in clusters. Above, bundles of herbs hang from the beams, thyme, chamomile, and dried rowan leaves, guarding dreams. Elder Martha leans forward, telling a tale of a shepherd girl who outwitted a winter spirit. Children press close, drawn by the heat and the story's flickering tension. From a back corner, a woman hums. Her lullaby meets the rhythm of crackling flame. Thomas walks the room's edge, checking for drafts. He tucks a sheepskin tighter around an old man's shoulders and nods silently to Edith. Heat fought more than cold. It fought despair. Each log meant warmth, hope, and another breath carried forward. A pale child shifts on her cot, sweat beading her brow. Edith leans close, fingers brushing the girl's cheek. The fever breaks with a sigh soft and small, like the exhale of spring. Outside, morning sun slips through thinning mist. Snow melts in beads off thatched roofs. Chickens emerge from their coop, blinking dumbly at the light. Thomas crosses the courtyard with a flask of warm broth, his breath clouding. The door creaks open. Inside, laughter erupts, quiet at first, then growing. Martha sits up straighter. She's better. Someone whispers, it's lifting. Brother Anselm crosses himself, his eyes wet. No sermon, just silence. Edith steps out, stands at the edge of the cordon. Wind brushes her face, carrying the faintest scent of thawing earth. 7 days of ritual and vigilance yielded a single miracle and the scent of hope on frozen air. Inside each cottage, habits form lifelines. A pot of broth is always on. Hands are scrubbed in vinegar water before meals. Garlic cloves swing in bundles above every door. Children carry bundles of rue and sage between homes, exchanging them like secret codes. Martha weaves mop strings from nettle fibers and dips them in lye. Floors are scrubbed with rhythm and resolve. The rhythm of survival grows familiar. Brew, ladle, clean, sleep, repeat. Thomas checks on Edith. She nods, tired but unbowed. He leaves a handful of oats on her table. No words. The air is warmer inside than out. But not just from fire. Every cottage became a micro-laboratory, distilling old lore into everyday survival. The barn is colder than the longhouse, but steadier somehow. Thomas lights a candle from a protected ember and approaches the tallyboard. He runs a finger down the inked column: oats, barley, peas. Each villager's share is marked in hash lines. The ink smudges where the ledger's been handled with damp fingers. Trembling fingers, a child knocks. Mama says, we've run out. Thomas takes a measure, wraps it in waxed cloth, and hands it over with 2 fingers pressed to his lips. In the corner, The grain sacks stand tall but silent. He touches them like kin. Grain was more precious than gold. Keeping track was keeping alive with ledger and oath alike. In the small stone chapel, Brother Anselm lays a braid of garlic beneath the altar. He sprinkles it with blessed water, whispering Latin over its pale loops. Down the slope, Edith stirs nettle stew with a carved ladle made from bones. She sings as she stirs, a song passed down from her grandmother. At dusk, they meet in the longhouse and nod, no friction, no rivalry, just faith braided with healing. A mother draws a garlic circle around her sleeping son. A prayer is tucked beneath his cot, alongside an herb sachet. Sacred and survival coiled together, priest and herbalist intertwining hope in every vessel. Two villagers pace along the inner cordon. Their cloaks flap in the wind. They carry bundles of dried mint and birch, dipping them into vinegar and spraying the air. At designated points, they pause. One sips fish broth, the other checks a ledger on a slate tile. In the distance, a dog barks. A stranger approaches and stops short. The watcher raises a hand. No entry. A woman inside the cordon waves. No contacts, just recognition. The guards nod. The rope line is both boundary and vow. Standing watch was medicine, turbs, and vigilance. Fence and feast, woven safe against outside terror. A little girl kneels beside Marta, holding a small pot of elderflower honey. Her fingers tremble as she uncorks it and places it on the sill. Marta pats her head. Later, they tie a ribbon and soak it in thyme tea. Steam rises. The girl waves the damp ribbon toward the hearth like a banner. Other children join, wrapping ribbons around wrist and waist. Edith watches, smiling faintly. The plague is not gone, but neither is play. In their small hands, tradition passed forward, hope knitted through generations in simple acts. On the seventh night, Edith returns to the cordon gate. She unfastens the knots one by one. The rope slips to the snow, coiling like a shed skin. Villagers wait in held breath. The gate creaks open. Children run first, bundled in cloaks. Laughing behind them, Thomas arrives with flat barley cakes. Marta hands out smoked fish wrapped in leaves. Anselm raises his hand in silence. The people bow their heads. Then, slowly, they eat. Sunlight spills across the courtyard. The sound of spoons and breath and wind returns. They defeated plague, not with armor, but with roots and ritual, each act a stitch in their survival tapestry. Hope, hard won, thawed the frost. A bonfire hissed at the village center, its smoke thick with rosemary and mugwort. One by one, villagers stepped into the circle, tossing in sprigs gathered from their gardens. Faces flickered in the firelight, some solemn, some trembling. Children clutched their parents' tunics as the smoke curled around them like a shroud. The chant was quiet, repetitive, familiar. No magic promised, no miracle expected. But the act itself, this weekly ritual, gave structure to chaos. The smoke, thick and bitter, cloaked them from fear, if only for a while. In the face of death, they found strength in ritual shared rites that healed bodies and steadied minds. The fire wasn't just fire, it was a perimeter against panic. The circle was a zone of permission, grief, faith, hope, all allowed inside. When the flames died down, no words were spoken, but backs were straighter. Eyes lifted. They had done what could be done, together. At the village gate, a rope cordon swayed in wind. A new group waited in silence, those marked for quarantine. Edith poured cold water from a clay jug, rinsing their hands and feet. One by one, they stepped through a shallow trench and bowed their heads for the crossbrand. A glowing iron kissed to each forearm. The iron didn't scar deeply, it wasn't meant to. But the pain was real, it said. You crossed into danger. You are not the same. Crossing the cordon was a social, trial-cleansing ritual, as transformative as baptism, signaling both danger and deliverance. Children cried softly. Elders whispered blessings. Everyone watched. The bath, the brand, the bow, 3 acts in one passage. Not punishment, not mere precaution. Transformation, each emerged changed. Marked, not as infected, but as courageous, willing to stand apart to preserve the whole. In a world where no cure existed, courage became medicine, and ritual turned isolation into honor. In the longhouse, villagers knelt shoulder to shoulder around baskets of rue, garlic, and hyssop. Smoke from a censer swirled above them. Edith stood with raised hands, murmuring the words, "May these herbs bear light, breath, and shield." The children giggled as they weaved grimy fingers, threading sprigs into twined wreaths. Elders hummed the chant low. Outside, the wind howled. Narration. This ceremony reset hope. The act of blessing herbs weekly reinforced belief. We protect ourselves together. Each garland, once complete, was draped over a lintel, a beam, a sleeping child. Not one home lacked one. Not one life went untouched by the act. The ritual was not just belief, was rhythm, predictable, repeatable, anchoring folk. Wisdom wasn't a substitute for science. It was their science. And in a time when nothing was certain, this 1 hour weaving, chanting, blessing gave structure to uncertainty. A net of faith, strung from garlic stems and rosemary threads. As twilight descended, the villagers emerged, cloaked in wool dyed ash grey. No one spoke. A procession wound through the main lane, barefoot over frozen mud. Each bore a small skull-topped banner, swaying gently with their step. The silence was not empty. It was filled with memory. A bell tolled once with each corner passed. At the square, they knelt, the banners were lowered. A single candle was lit. Mourning was public, collective, a processional sharing of loss to ease individual grief. No prayers spoken aloud, only the sound of breath in frost, a sob, a sniff, and stillness. Then, after a time, the banners were raised again. They walked back. The act was known, practiced, needed. The silence gave shape to sorrow. The ritual allowed pain to move, not get stuck. They did not forget the dead, but they refused to carry them alone. This was not just mourning, it was mutual survival. In the longhouse, bowls passed hand to hand, thin barley stew with a few slices of dried turnip. No seconds, no complaints. Just grateful eyes and shared silence. Each family sat with another, not their own. That was the rule. A single candle sat at the center of each table, flame reflecting in broth. Even amid scarcity, these ritual meals told a message. We still belong, we still care, we survive them in small measure. The ritual was not indulgent, it was deliberate. Meager feasts at fixed times, regardless of the food available. In famine, hunger separates. These feasts pulled them back together. And the passing of bowls always clockwise, always slow ensured. Every hand gave and received. Children were taught to say enough aloud. Gratitude mattered as much as grain. In such moments, food became message. Portion became prayer. Hunger became communal. And in the act of eating less, they nourished each other more. Each week, families brought their own herbs to the square, fresh sprigs of yarrow, tansy, or sage. Elders dipped them in salt water and passed them down the line. Each herb bundle was hung by its creator on a central post, then snipped and redistributed. No one took their own back. These herb wards weren't just protection, they were shared statements of care, offering agency to families powerless before plague. The effect was symbolic and real. Each family left the square with someone else's hope over their doorway. And in a time when so much was beyond control, that exchange gave them something to hold. Even children knew the ritual by heart. Sprig, dip, bind, hang, trade. No sermon could match the feeling. I protect you, you protect me. This was not magic. This was medicine made of meaning. Each wreath on each door whispered, "You are not alone." Dr. Segrid Thompson appears amid dimly lit bookshelves and archival prints. Rituals weren't superstition, they were social glue, buffering terror with shared purpose. Archival visuals cut in silent processions, bonfire circles, prayer feasts, then a modern support group around a circle of candles. Science now shows what they knew in their bones. Ritual reduces fear. Shared actions boost oxytocin. Predictable practices calm chaotic minds. Dr. Thompson continues, when crisis removes agency, ritual returns it. Even if the plague continued, people could act, and acting reduced despair. She holds up a copy of a medieval herb manual, faded and fingerprinted. Each recipe wasn't just about curing, it was about participation. That's what healed. As she speaks, the screen overlays a child binding herbs, a mother lighting a hearth, a grandfather carving a skull banner. Against plague, their best medicine wasn't always physical. It was psychological cohesion, born in action and shared in flame. The bonfire circle is empty now, ash smouldering in the breeze. Herb wreaths still swing on doorposts, some fresh, some faded. Children skip rope in the distance. Laughter returns slowly, like thawing ground. Their greatest medicine wasn't vinegar or herb, it was ritual itself, binding them against despair. At one door, a woman leans into her threshold, garland, and breathes deeply. The scent is faint, but enough. Behind her, a man stokes the fire, pauses, and nods. The rituals were not curesy, but they were containers. For fear, for grief, for solidarity. They didn't erase the darkness. They carried people through it. In a world without answers, they created anchors. And in doing so, they wrote a survival story, not in words, but in acts repeated with reverence. Fade to black on a single herb sprig, glowing in sunrise. A runic tallyboard lies against a beam in Thomas's barn. Each etched stroke, denoting more than grain or herbs, it records life itself. One column tallies rations, another herb stocks, another burial duties. His fingers trace the newest notch as flour is poured into a cloth sack. Nothing goes uncounted. Each mark holds weight. Take too much, and the council will question your loyalty. Take too little, and your family may not last the week. The board breathes fear and fairness in equal measure. By candlelight, the elders gather. Their voices are low but firm. Thomas leans forward as they argue. A half pint or a quarter pint per mouth. Outside, hunger waits. Inside, they strike balance with ritual and arithmetic. The board is tapped with decision. Thomas nods and leaves to distribute the morning flasks of oat gruel. Each scoop isn't just a meal, it's part of the social contract, turning fear into order and scarcity into survival. Near the village edge, the ash from last week's burned plague garlands is swept into compost pits. The fire-scorched herbs still carry a presence through mugwort and rosemary, now transformed into humus. Above them, new greens sprout in rows, cress, winter kale, even early mustard leaf. Each sprout is a whisper of recovery. Nothing is wasted. The cycle tightens. What warded the sick now nourishes the living. Beside the barn, Marta grinds bones, underfoot goat and chicken, mostly crushed to powder and folded into soil. The work is loud and crude, but the meaning is elegant. Every meal leaves behind the seed of another. The marrow, once boiled for broth, now fortifies grain. Rows of spring barley push up from the dirt, thicker and darker where the bone meal fell. One harvest feeds the next. Under cover of night, two figures meet at the cordon's edge. A fisherman hoists a sack of salted herring. Thomas offers a pouch of barley porridge. No words are spoken. The sacks slide across the rope. Fingers lift in quiet acknowledgement. This is not sanctioned trade, but it is survival. When formal trade broke down, the villagers made their own networks. Beeswax for sealing herb scrolls, vinegar for fish oil, dried nettles for smelt. The ledger may not show it, but every quiet exchange pulled another thread into the community net. Within the longhouse, elders raise their hands to vote. An old voice breaks the silence. Plague debts forgiven. Gasps ripple. Relief floods faces lined with worry. This is no gesture of mercy, it's necessity. Families, now broken and borrowed, need kin more than they need accounts. Resetting debts renews the village's circulatory system, trust, loyalty, obligation reborn in shared burden. In a candlelit archive filled with crumbling ledgers and soot-smudged scrolls, Professor Leif Gunvaldson speaks softly. Though the ink has faded, the patterns speak clearly. Flour borrowed, vinegar repaid, livestock exchanged. The system appears primitive, but only on the surface. What lived here was economic adaptation in its purest form. When coinage collapsed, the village kept turning because credit lived in memory, barter in hands, and resilience in shared purpose. As the sun lifts, a CGI map glows with lines. Grain milled into stew, scraps turned to compost, nutrients returned to field, barley ripening in rows. The loop completes itself again and again. There was no waste, only repurposing. No profit, only preservation. They rationed not to restrict, but to extend. They recycled not to conserve, but to restart. They bartered not to gain, but to weave. Even debt was a ritual, its forgiveness, not a loss, but an investment in continuity. In their endless cycle, the village found more than survival. They found a living system encoded in every hand, every bowl, every field. A line stretches along the grey ribs of a modern city block. Shoppers wait at the door of a food bank, bundled in coats, clutching reusable bags. A volunteer checks a clipboard and hands out cans, one by one. The bags filled with basics, lentils, oats, tinned greens and, beside the loading zone, someone quietly leaves a crate of fresh apples from a backyard tree. This is what hunger looks like today. Not isolation, but a crowd bound together by necessity. A mirror of old scarcity, refracted through steel and pavement. On one side of the screen, a medieval cordon rope tied around wooden stakes. On the other, suburban sidewalks wrapped in bright plastic tape. Families stay behind glass. Neighbors light candles on porches. Rituals re-emerge. Where once garlands and herbs marked quarantine zones, now symbols are drawn in chalk or taped to mailboxes. The structure matters less than the meaning. Clear rules, visible markers, these bind a community far more tightly than any mandate. It isn't technology that earns trust, it's tradition, reborn. A gardener bends over a patch of rye. Nearby, jars line a shelf, cabbage bubbling into kraut, carrots fizzing into brine. Seed packets, red heirloom barley, spelt red goosefoot. These grains are old, and their roots run deep. They survived frost and famine once before. The gardener smiles as she stirs a batch of kimchi, its fire-tinged scent a link to preservation practices centuries old. Fermentation, it turns out, is not just culinary, it's climate resilience, immune system support, and legacy in a jar. On a neighborhood Facebook group, Someone offers surplus eggs in exchange for flour. Replies, fill the thread. A man down the block leaves rhubarb jam in ice cream containers on a stoop. At dusk, a loaf of fresh bread shows up beside a jar of pickles. No invoices, no apps, just instinct. A reenactment of barter lines, cloaked in modern convenience. What they shared in silence, we echo in emojis and porch drop gratitude. The ledger is memory. The network is the neighborhood. In a community hall repurposed for a food workshop, people gather around long tables. A woman in gloves demonstrates how to start sourdough, how to salt beans, how to make kavos fizz just right. Children help slice cabbage. Parents trade stories. They taste, adjust, laugh. Fermentation is chemistry, but also confidence. Root cellar thinking, reborn in crockpots and water baths. We are rediscovering what they never forgot, that resilience begins with the hands. A bell rings at sunset. It's soft but clear. Across the street, families eat outside, folding chairs arranged in wide arcs. Some meals are warm and elaborate, others modest and canned, but they are shared. No one eats alone. These are not feasts of abundance. They are rituals of presence, bonfires for the psyche. In these small weekly ceremonies, strength is transmitted not by sermon or screen, but by glance and spoon and song. In an old film archive, black and white footage flickers beside two expert voices. Dr. Emma Clark speaks of public health's invisible scaffolding, how rituals of care and routines of resource sharing lower stress, flatten curves. Dr. Paula Reyes explains how polycultural gardens and local food webs outperform monocrops. When climate lashes the land, the past becomes a toolkit. The future, a fermentation of ancient methods and modern intent. Maps of past and present overlay one another. Where a medieval field cycled grain into stew, into compost, into soil again, a modern garden does the same. Raised beds brim with tomatoes and leeks. Freezers hum behind a church pantry. Volunteers cart spinach to an elder's porch. It's not replication, it's recursion. A rhythm resurfacing, in every exchange, a whisper from the old world. Take only what you need. Give what you can, and feed someone else if you're full. Dawn rises over a cul-de-sac. A toddler waters chard. A grandmother stocks her root cellar with fermented greens. Neighbors sit under a shared street lamp, passing bowls of lentil stew and sourdough torn into quarters. They chew, laugh, rest. The street glows not with power, but with purpose. Long ago, villagers leaned on one another and on nature's pantry. They drew strength from ritual, herb, and hope. Now, we must do the same. The science is ours, but so is the spirit. Let the roots run backward and forward at once. The best vaccine may still be community. The longhouse breathes its last before the thaw. Inside, steam rises from a blackened cauldron, the final pot of nettle barley gruel simmering low, scenting the air with earth and endurance. The fire crackles softly, fed by fistfuls of dried root and twig. Light from the open door cuts across the flagstone floor, catching on bundles of herbs now wilted. Their work done, beyond the doorway, frost lifts from fields where nothing moved for weeks. The village exhales. Edith the healer kneels by the hearth. Her hands, steady through every fevered night, are now still. One by one, she casts the last sprigs mugwort, rosemary, yarrow, into the embers. They catch with a gentle hiss, spiraling smoke into the beams like a final prayer. Around her, the tools of crisis rest. Clay bowls stacked, cloths washed and hung, salves sealed and labeled. Nothing heroic, everything essential. Elsewhere, a volunteer opens a food bank crate, Canned beans, dried oats, powdered broth, her sleeves are rolled, her breath fogs in morning air. She lifts each item with quiet purpose. It is not medieval, but it is the same. Ritual care, sustenance prepared for strangers, a rhythm repeated over centuries, grain to gruel, neighbor to neighbor. The camera lingers on the longhouse, one last time, on footprints pressed into thawing earth, on walls that held more than heat. Here, the villagers lived through death without surrender. Their strength was a weaving, herb and hearth, memory and motion, care passed hand to hand. Their survival was not a single act, but 1,000 small choices repeated in faith. They planted, rationed, shared, buried, and hoped, and still they rose each morning to do it again. Now we carry that thread. In every pantry, in every meal cooked from scratch, every seed saved, every story told beside a flame we stitch ourselves to their resilience. The future will ask of us what the past once did. Not perfection, but presence. Not plenty, but persistence. Let this be our inheritance. Share this story. Teach the recipes. Bless the gardens. For in each dark winter, we hold both plague and possibility. On ash-dark stone, a single sprig of yarrow lies fresh and bright, healing, still, across all time.